Your commander is a woman. Her husband is standing 40 feet to her left. He is not dead. He is not a martyr. He is not the reason any of this is happening. And you are going to win. That is the part nobody warns you about. Not the losing, the winning. You are a foot soldier in the Red River Delta. In about 18 months, you will watch the governor of this province put his household on a boat and run for the coast. And 14 centuries from now, your own descendants will kill him off. On paper, because they will not be able to explain you any other way. Let's get one thing straight. The people who erased the woman you followed were not the people who beat her. First, forget the picture you were handed. The one where a mighty civilization arrives with iron and writing and calendars, and finds a few thatched villages squatting in the mud, and generously drags them into history. That picture is not just wrong. Stephen O'Hara, Asian Perspectives, 1982, calls it partially inverted. What the Han actually walked into, in the sources that survived, a stable, structured, productive, populous, and relatively sophisticated society of whose existence they had a knowledge, if not an appreciation, through intermediary sources of long standing. Read that last clause again. They knew you were here. They had traded with you through middlemen for generations. Nobody discovered you. You were on a list. So you are a farmer with a bronze blade, in the Delta, around the year 40. Your fields have been worked by people with your face for longer than the empire to your north has had that name. Your lord holds the county of Mei Lin. His daughter will shortly hold it after him, because there are no sons, and in this Delta, that sentence is not a crisis. It is just Tuesday. That last part is what the empire cannot live with. Not your bronze, not your rice, your inheritance law. Here is the story you already know, even if you have never heard of this place. A cruel governor executes a nobleman. The widow, wild with grief, raises an army to avenge her husband. She wins. She reigns. She falls. She throws herself into a river. It is a good story. It has a shape. Grief in, army out. It is also, according to the two historians who have looked hardest at the sources, a later edit. Keith Taylor, in The Birth of Vietnam, University of California Press, 1983, page 39, writes this, and I want you to hear the whole sentence, because the middle of it is doing something the ending gets credit for. There is no evidence for this idea. Surely it came from the patriarchal bias of later centuries, which could not countenance a woman leading a rebellion and being recognized as queen so long as her husband still lived. The Chinese sources make it clear that Thai Sak followed his wife's leadership. Followed. Not avenged, followed. Stephen O'Hara got there independently. In Asian Perspectives, Volume 22, and hold that citation loosely. I will come back to why in a second. O'Hara's line is that the husband was murdered detail is missing from the Chinese record, and that Tring Trak rode out and led her still very much alive husband along with her. 2 scholars. 2 institutions. 2 decades of reading the same characters. 2. Same conclusion. The grieving widow story is not what the conquerors wrote down. It is what her own side wrote down. Later, much later. Now the citation. O'Hara's article is printed with 1,979 in the running header on the page. The publisher's own catalog says 1,982. His footnote says he finished it in early 1978, and then cites a book published in 1980. So the issue was dated 1 year, printed in another, and touched up in between. I am telling you this because you will find it cited as 1,979 nearly everywhere, and I could have copied that and moved on and you would never have known. The honest version, Volume 22, Issue 2, dated 1,979, published 1,982. It took 3 sources to get a year. Keep that number in your head. It is going to be a useful measure of how much anyone actually checked. So the husband is alive. Both men agree on that. That bolt holds. Now watch what happens the moment we ask the next question, why she rose, and the agreement falls apart in the space of a single sentence. There is one short line in the Chinese record about the governor and the law. Both men translate it. Here they are, side by side. Taylor, page 38. The governor attempted to restrain him with legal procedures, literally tied him up with the law. Him. The husband, And then Tring Track, in Taylor's reading, stirred her husband to action and took over the mobilizing herself. O'Hara, page 160, Su Ting used the laws with which to entangle her. And then, it is Trung Trak's problem with the law that causes her to revolt. Same passage, two translators, different person on the receiving end of the verb, and these are not the same story. In Taylor's, the law comes for her husband, and she is the one who decides that this will not be survived quietly. She is the escalation. In O'Hara's, the law comes for her, directly, and the man follows her out the door. One is a woman who answers. One is a woman who was the target all along. I am not going to pick one for you, and here is the thing that should make you slow down. This is not a gap in the record. This is the record. The sentence exists. It survived 2,000 years. We have it. We simply cannot agree who it is about, and everything downstream, every documentary, every schoolbook, every confident paragraph about what she wanted is standing on a pronoun. The man who gave us the sharpest theory about her motive knew it too. O'Hara, before he offers his own hypothesis, stops and says this. I submit that it is not possible in the current state of our knowledge about the period to make any valid judgments about the character of Trung Trak and those who surrounded her, much less attach any such judgments to reasons for their revolt. That is the scholar with the theory, telling you the theory cannot bear weight. He labeled it, and warned you not to lean on it. Every retelling since has leaned on it. None of them printed the warning, so if she was not avenging a corpse, what was she doing? To answer that, you need to know what the empire was actually doing to this delta, and it was not what the textbooks call civilizing. It was closer to a very violent audit of who owned the fields. Start with the women. Taylor, page 13. Women enjoyed a relatively high status in Lac society. As we shall presently see, when the Lac lords eventually rose up against increasing Chinese influence, they were led by women, and on the same page inheritance could pass through both the mother's line and the father's. Sit with that second part. Property that moves through mothers. Now bring in a Han official named He Si Kwang. The Book of Later Han credits him with transforming the locals by rights and justice. Rights and justice. It sounds like a school motto. O'Hara's reading, and this is a reading, he says can be interpreted, and I am keeping his hedge because he earned it, is that rights and justice meant marriage law. Specifically, forcing local people onto Chinese marriage rights, and with them, patrilineality and exclusive male inheritance. Why would an empire care that much about weddings? Because of what O'Hara says next, page 159, and it is the least romantic sentence in this entire episode. Plainly stated, the patrilineal, nay, patriarchal, Chinese, were denied legal access to the real estate. There it is. Han men were arriving in the delta. They were marrying local women. And they were discovering that marrying a woman here did not get you her land, because her land went to her female relatives. You cannot buy the delta. You cannot marry into the delta. So, you rewrite the rules of descent, and then you can. That is not cultural exchange. That is a hostile takeover conducted through family law. And now, Trung Trak's situation stops being a tragedy and starts being a balance sheet. O'Hara thinks, and he says, I believe, so I am saying it the way he said it, that her trouble with Chinese law had to do with her rights as a noblewoman over her family's lands. She was heir to Mei Lin. There are no brothers anywhere in the record. Her marriage joined two territories in the most fertile stretch of the province. Break her, and you break the largest concentration of native landholding in the delta. And you free up the fields. That is O'Hara's hypothesis from 1982 or 1979. Here is the part I have to tell you. In 44 years, I could not find a single peer-reviewed article that tested it. Not one that confirmed it. Not one that refuted it. It has just been sitting there, getting cited, unexamined, which is its own kind of erasure, and a quieter one. Now we arrive at the sentence you came here for, and I am not going to give it to you. You want me to say ancient Vietnam was a matriarchy? It is right there. It is clean. It would do numbers. Here is what 4 people who actually read the primary sources say. O'Hara says the society was very possibly matrilineal and immediately adds, though one cannot be certain about it. Taylor refuses the word. Page 77. We need not use the term matriarchy. He lands on bilateral, and says it seems to be most appropriate. Then he draws the line precisely. Ancient Vietnamese society may not have been controlled by women, but it is clear that women enjoyed hereditary rights that allowed them to assume roles of political leadership. Jennifer Holmgren, at the Australian National University, 1980, page 9, refuses both words, although there is little evidence that UA culture was either matriarchal or matrilinear. Her word is matrilocal clans organized around where the women stayed, and she says the women's position was equal, if not superior, to that of men. And Insun Yu, in Southeast Asia Research, 1999, a Korean scholar, and I mention that only because I nearly credited this paper to an author who does not exist, and we will get to that, Yu says. Matrilineality was more common in ancient times. Patrilineality won later, and the two systems long coexisted. Matrilineal, bilateral, matrilocal, both at once. 4 experts, 4 different adjectives, 0 agreement. I am not going to pick one for you. That disagreement is real, it is in the literature, and a channel that flattens it into ancient Vietnam was a matriarchy, so the sentence lands cleaner is a channel you should stop watching. And notice which way the flattening goes. 2 of those 4 scholars specifically deliberately reached for a word and pushed it away. If you quote Taylor or Holmgren to prove Vietnam was a matriarchy, you have not summarized them. You have reversed them. Which, and I want to be exact about this, is the same move the 15th century chroniclers made. Take a woman the sources will not fully explain, and give her an explanation that flatters. They gave her a dead husband. We give her a matriarchy. Both times, she is holding something we are not comfortable letting her hold on her own terms. The empire came back in year 42. They sent a man named Ma Yuan, and his title, per Holmgren, was General Who Calms the Waves, which is the sort of thing you name a man when you would rather not name what he does. Here is his army, and here is where I get to show you what checking actually buys you. You will find the figure 32,000. It is on history sites. It is attributed to O'Hara. O'Hara, page 161, actual words, 20,000 men under arms. Taylor breaks the same force down on pages 39 and 49. 8,000 regulars from northern China, 12,000 militia raised in the southern prefectures. 8 plus 12. 20. Somebody, somewhere, read 20,000 regulars and 12,000 auxiliaries, added them, published 32,000, and hung O'Hara's name on it, and it spread. Because a bigger number is a better story, and nobody opened the PDF. But go back to Taylor's breakdown because it is doing something worse than arithmetic. 8,000 men came down from the north. 12,000 were raised locally, southern prefectures, neighbors, near neighbors. The army that ended you was mostly not the empire. It was mostly the people who lived close enough to be conscripted and far enough to not care. That is how empires do it. Not with legions from the capital, with your cousins, on a quota. The campaign took 2 years. Taylor, page 40. More than 10,000 of your side surrendered. Between 3,000 and 5,000 more were captured later and beheaded. Holmgren says the confiscations that followed symbolized stripping the last vestiges of political and economic power from the native leaders. Then Ma Yuan sat down and revised the local law to match imperial law. Of course he did. The land was the whole point. It was always the land. You want to know how she died? So does everyone. It is the most retold part of her, and the part I trust least. The version you have heard, cornered, unbeaten, the sisters walk into the river and drown themselves rather than kneel. The Day River, the Red River. Year 43. I am not going to give you that. Taylor's main text, page 40, says Trung Trak and her sister were beheaded, and that in the first month of the new year, their heads were sent to the Han court at Lo Yang. Holmgren, page 12, says they were caught and executed. O'Hara does not describe the manner at all. He writes only of the deaths of Trak and her younger sister, and the drowning. Taylor puts it in a footnote, not in the text, a footnote. And not alone, he lists it beside 2 other endings drawn from the same tradition, that they died of illness, or that they disappeared into the clouds, drowned, or sick, or ascended into the sky. Pick one. Now, I could tell you Taylor calls the drowning a later legend. It is a tidy line, and you would believe me, because it sounds like the sort of thing a historian says. He never says it. What he does is put the beheading in the main text and put the drowning in a footnote next to a woman evaporating into cloud, and then say nothing further and let you do that arithmetic yourself. So I will report what he did, not what he thinks. Those are different things, and the gap between them is where most bad history gets made. Here is what we are left holding. The records that survived say a head went north in a box, in January, to be shown to a court that had never met her. The records that came later say she chose the water. One of those is a defeat. The other is a decision. You can see why the second one traveled. So here is what the erasure actually looked like, and it is not the shape you were expecting. The Han wrote her down plainly. They had no reason not to. To them, a woman commanding an army was not a scandal to be buried, it was proof these people needed governing. O'Hara, page 160. The Chinese felt no such compunctions about describing the happenings in what was to them a society of barbarians, which gave high honor to women. Her power survives in the enemy's file because the enemy found it contemptible. Contempt preserves things. It has no motive to edit. Her own descendants could not manage it. By the 15th century, her people had spent 1,000 years absorbing the conqueror's idea of what a woman is for. And when their scholars finally sat down to write their own national history, their own, at last, in their own hands, in their own country, they arrived at your commander and they could not write the sentence. So they killed her husband. Not the governor, the historians. 1,400 years after the fact, with a brush, O'Hara saw exactly what that was. He wrote that they could not conceive of the fact that the society of their distant ancestors allowed such a prominent place to women, and so they rewrote history to follow what must have been the glorious truth. And then he added 5 words, in a parenthesis, that I have not been able to put down since I read them, a practice which has yet to die out completely. He wrote that in 1979, or 1982. Ma Yuan burned your fields and took your bronze and sent her head to Luoyang, and none of it took. She kept her name, she kept her temples. Her mother's tomb is still standing, her father's is gone. The conquest that actually landed was the one that took 1,000 years and arrived without an army. It never needed to erase her. It only needed her grandchildren's grandchildren to find her embarrassing. You were there. You saw the man standing 40 feet to her left, alive, taking her orders, and it was the least remarkable thing about that morning. They did not defeat her. They rewrote the room until she needed a reason. And I still cannot tell you what her reason was. Nobody can. There is one sentence about a governor and a law, and 2 serious men read it and could not agree who it was aimed at. That is the whole inheritance, 1 contested line and 1,000 confident retellings stacked on top of it. What the records that survived will carry is smaller and harder and I think better. The law came for that house. She answered it. He followed her out the door. Everything after that is somebody's idea of what a woman is allowed to want. Empires take the land, then they wait, and it is the grandchildren who hand back the story, with the woman quietly edited down to a widow. Thank you to our family watching from Portland.